changes in that already, and so we were trying to give a little bit more time, but we're going to get started anyway, and we may do some rearranging, and we're appreciative of Brian that showed up already. Um, so anyway, I will call this meeting to order. This is August 13th, the second day of our retreat. Couple things, couple remarks that I want to make. One, this is Deidre's last meeting. We do want to do the official resolution for her that she will receive. Her departure, like Brad's, has been a little bit fluid, waiting for Congress to have the right time to officially appoint somebody, and changes in the law. So anyway, her departure has been a little fluid. We're going to ask her to come to the November meeting if that's possible, and we will give you your framed resolution at that point in time. Does that work for you? She was mentioning how emotional it would be for her to drive home today after her last meeting, and now she gets to have today and November to be emotional. So, so we're just going to drag this out for you. Thank you so much, Deidre, and we will praise you at that meeting. Thank you. And another remark I wanted to make, and I was telling President Ryan, I was wanted to make sure this was highlighted. I think it's quite an honor that we're going to be able to get into the prisons in Ontario and Pendleton and offer life-changing opportunities to those folks with education. And I was telling Deidre, I mean Kelly, that I was thinking about it last night, and then oddly enough, the devotions this morning had something to do with, prison ministry. And so I thought, I'm going to mention this today because I think it's really a wonderful opportunity for folks to um, hopefully have a change in their trajectory on the rest of their life. So I wanted to give you a chance to, if any of you had a question, to direct it to President Ryan at this point in time about that program. I know I had questions when we were first visiting about it, financially, staffing, those kinds of questions. So if you have any questions along that line, this is the time to do that.
I have a question. When you said this yesterday, actually, I imagine then this is sort of the contract that BMCC vacated, maybe slightly different, but similar.
Uh, it's different, actually.
Okay.
So TVCC stepped in where BMCC was.
Oh.
So they're actually serving in all 4 Eastern Oregon prisons, including Pendleton and Hermiston areas. In fact, one of the things that was kind of funny, I don't think Scott's here, but Nate was on the trip with us. When we went into, it's Two Rivers is what it's called. Is it Two Rivers, the one in Hermiston? Okay, sorry, I get the names mixed up. I apologize. One of the correctional officers kind of razzed us. He was like, "Why is TVCC here and not EOU? You're Eastern Oregon." And it was funny. Yeah, so TVCC stepped in there, and Tracy Hightower, Department of Corrections, reached out to me pretty early on. I think Cheryl and I were talking about it as early as September last year, kind of asked us, would you be willing to be a 4-year partner? Because so TVCC will continue to take care of the associates. And that's important for us because, we fiscally, the Pell does not cover the tuition of EOU. And so there is a gap there. These students are more likely to graduate than in a lot of other cases. So we will get more performance funding, probably per student we serve. But yeah, we're actually stepping in as the first 4-year partner these prisons have ever had.
Okay, that makes more sense because I was curious how we pivoted in, and so I love that. And like you said, it's an interesting dynamic that we probably will have better completion rates in that setting. So, but I'm excited to hear kind of an update probably this time next year.
Yeah, Peter is currently working on our application to NWCCU. He met with them, I think, last week. So we're going to keep pushing forward and hopefully get through the approval process as soon as possible.
Any other questions or comments?
Can anybody ask you a question here? So, what are you going to offer?
It's a Bachelor of Liberal Arts. So what happens when you have a collection of individuals who've had really difficult journeys through life is they have a lot of credits. And we have to offer one degree. We have to streamline the offering. And the most nimble degree on our campus is a Bachelor of Liberal Studies. We're also offering a business minor with that to help leverage that credential, but it allows them to do project-based learning in addition to, taking various classes and finding ways to fit them in. One of the things that may not surprise you when you visit these institutions is that the law library is super popular. So there's some credits there that people have earned, and then of course prior to their journeys, which landed them in custody. So it's a nimble degree, and what's great about us offering that is even though, in some ways this is a captive audience, they also, each of the individuals in these prisons usually have family throughout Eastern Oregon or even Western Oregon. So they may at some point be given an opportunity to move to the West. And what we've done in our curriculum is we've aligned it with PSU, the other 4-year institution who's working on this project. They're offering classes on the West side. So people will be able to transfer, I think, ultimately once both of us build up more of our programming. So they don't have to choose between, do I stay in school or do I be closer with my family? That's a kind of terrible choice to have to make.
I don't find any irony in the fact that the law portion of the library is extensive at any prison. One thing, I was part of a program a few years ago where we went into, here the correctional facility and worked with, people coming out of prisons on businesses and helping them develop. And so I was glad to hear that was a portion of it. And I'd love to visit and share some of the things we did there, of the successes and some of the things that I thought really weren't as effective in the program. But it was, in my mind, giving them an opportunity they don't have, and it also meets a demand, which is part of the reason we're here. Some of the job sectors that there's people in that environment can do, if they get the mental health support, they get the structure, they get the support, they can actually be unbelievably productive. That's all.
Yeah, and we noticed that when we visited the RV facility in La Grande. They're looking to hire individual out of custody and help them grow too. And once you've paid your time, it's now time to move on to forgiveness and building your life. And I think one of the things that our degree program allows people to do is to think about the future and dream and imagine a better life.
Well, I'll just, I think it's wonderful. I remember back in the day when we explored, EOU explored this option, and it just wasn't, we were willing to do it, but the door wasn't open. So I'm really glad that the door is open. What kind of student services can be provided to these students in terms of course, I'm thinking academic advising, and maybe you might talk about the financial aid part or how all of that's going to look.
We're required to offer the same services that we offer on campus students to these individuals. It's really the delivery of services that change. The communication streams within prisons is extremely difficult. So if you take, for example, our learning management system, Canvas, ordinarily students like Deidre and Anna, they just message their faculty from that program to gain access to them. But because of rules and regulations within the prisons, certain components of Canvas have to be turned off. So communication in particular, they use something they call kites. And it's old school, it's paper. So we're going to have to find ways to deliver services differently. Some of that's going to be possible through using things like Microsoft Teams. Both of the prisons we're originally partnering with to pilot our work have Microsoft Teams rooms. Access to telephones is available. But I think we also hope to deliver some staff appointments. There's already FAFSA help in a lot of these spaces. We're hoping to, if TVCC agrees, we're hoping to really advance the partnership with TVC further because Nate, Scott, and I were so impressed with the people that they have on board right there now, working people from GED to associates. We feel like their knowledge is is so exemplary. We're like, we would like to kind of hire you to help work with our people too, so we can do that seamless transfer. That has yet, to be resolved, but I am very eager to work with them to learn more about, how we can best deliver services. And I do want to say, Nate and Scott have been doing the business of working to get faculty on board, and they've, we had people raise their hand, people, in fact, like Kevin Walker, who's behind us in this room from Faculty Senate, who are eager to be part of this initiative. And I think, this is a life-changing initiative, but it requires more of you. It requires a different skill set. They're going to have to take modules so they can enter the person or deliver information there. So I'm really impressed. And, Colleen, who was our interim VP, was helping us work out, the student services piece, and people stepped up on the staff side too. So it's really meaningful that the community, it's one thing to have an idea. It's another thing when the individuals step up and are willing to serve.
Thank you. And so this is a good segue, since Brian's already entered our conversation and he's knowledgeable in this area. So Tim, why don't you go ahead and, oh, we do need to do roll. Sorry, jumped right into the meat of the meal here. Go for it.
Please respond when I call your name. Christine Cronin,
Present.
Margot Geegan.
Yep.
Gary George. Chuck Hoffman. Aaron Lair.
Present.
Tamara Mabbitt. Cheryl Martin.
Present.
George Mendoza.
Here.
Cedric Reel.
Present.
Kelly Ryan.
Here.
Deidre Schreiber.
Present.
Brenda Smith.
Here.
Anna Stanley.
Present.
Brad Stevens.
Present.
Carrie Thompson.
Here.
And Mauricio Valerio.
Present.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Do you have announcements for us?
I have some brief announcements. We ask everyone to please put your cell phones on Do Not Disturb. Members of the media, if you haven't already done so, please sign the sign-in sheet at the recorder's desk to my left. For the meeting to be effective, speakers need to use the tabletop microphones, keeping the mic very close to your mouth. We ask you to turn your mic off when you aren't using it. And if you brought a laptop or device, please be sure the speakers and microphone are turned off. That concludes my announcements.
Thank you. Mr. Seidel, would you take the stage, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair Martin. For the record, Tim Seidel, Vice President for University Advancement. We had a panel of 4, and we're down to 1. Right now, we had one of our panelists called in ill, another one couldn't make it, and then apparently our third one also maybe in the midst of a reunification drill with school district. So fortunately, we have some people with some connections to Baker and Baker City, Baker Valley, Baker School District. So I was wondering if I could ask Trustee Aaron Lair to come up and join us as well, because she might be able to help pinch hit on some of these questions. And while she's coming up, I'll let Brian introduce himself and give a little bit of background, and then we can start in talking a little bit more about Eastern's connections to the region.
I'm Brian Tweit, spelled Tweit. Everybody wants to pronounce it Tweet, but that's okay. Even my wife said it wrong for years. My history is I've always basically been an entrepreneur. I, was part of an investment group and traveled for 7 years everywhere. We invested in everything from racehorses to bars to all kinds of businesses. It didn't matter, but it was all over the country. So business is kind of what I live and breathe. Went into real estate for a while because I thought that was, a fun option. Owned some care facilities for about 20 years. Did some investments in those properties. Then I decided I was bored and wanted to get some more education. So I went back and got my federal security licenses, got my Series 66, Series 7, which everybody told me was like a 4-year degree that I ended up doing in about 5 months. Don't know if I'd ever do that again. I did a lot of portfolio management, managed about 1,100 accounts directly, indirectly with LPL Financial. We managed about $434 billion in assets. We did a lot of full discretion trades, which means I never talked to clients, just bought and sold, moved money nonstop. It was a little intense for years. Did a lot of quantitative analysis. Also decided to get my registered power planner certification to work with people and businesses. Then I kind of evolved into doing business help. I opened Launchpad Baker on Main Street, which is an entrepreneurial support business. Anybody has a business idea or existing business, we help them grow, expand. I work with about 100 businesses a year. Then the county a few years ago, I guess they didn't really hire me. I kind of told them what they needed and wrote a proposal for them, and then they hired me to do economic development for the county. We worked on a lot of projects, and I'm proud to say recently we've had unbelievably great success. And we probably brought in an extra 20 million in investment from other businesses building, things here and investing here. There's a couple of projects on the horizon. Ash Grove's going to do about a $60+ million expansion. I'm working on a $50 million facility project for an event complex. We did a Department of Energy grant, and I don't know if anybody's ever wrote one of those small 100-page grants. They're kind of daunting. But everything's looking positive and things are moving forward. Somebody asked me how the businesses were doing here in Baker County. Through COVID, we had a 98.5 success rate of keeping and retaining businesses. And the only reason it wasn't 100% because the 4 businesses that closed, 2 of them got bought out and got reopened immediately. One, the lady was running 2 businesses, didn't have enough staff to run them, at the same time. The last one, somebody bought the building and just said, yeah, you guys don't need to be in here anymore. So we did really well keeping our businesses open. Rural and Eastern Oregon businesses, I think, are used to surviving on what we call like vulture scraps. They don't have the benefit of having 10, 20,000 people walk in front of their doors every day. They have to do a good job with what they have. Baker County unemployment is, I don't know how they claim it as high as it is. We have 38 people in the entire county right now getting unemployment. 38. That's all Sumter, Richland, Halfway, Haines, Huntington, Baker, total. We have over 200 jobs open. Economically, we're poised for major growth and expansion. Our tourism has increased by 20-30% every year. Our revenues have gone up tremendously from that. So we have a few things we still got to fix and work on, but I'm unbelievably optimistic always. I'll be a little annoying, but that's how I'm going to be. That's all. If you have any questions, or I don't know what your protocol is today.
I have a sneaking suspicion that I was the one who scheduled the conflict for our current superintendent here in Baker. So I was the superintendent in Baker for the last 2 years, and Casey Hallgarth is the new superintendent here, and they're doing a reunification drill. So something when I came to Baker that was a lot leaner than I had seen it in other places was any of the emergency preparedness planning pieces. And when I was at Sherwood School District, I became FEMA trained in emergency planning, and so kind of brought some of those pieces here. And one of the culminating drills that you do in those is an actual reunification. So I'm kind of excited to hear how the day goes. But I'm pinch hitting. I have been out of that seat for a couple months at this point, but and he's not lying. Every time I had a meeting with Brian, it was just very optimistic. And I so some of the projects that he's referencing in Baker, there's a lot of really coordinated effort with the district. I don't know that that's always been the case, but we got really intentional in the last couple of years that Baker School District is one of the largest landowners in the county. And there's a lot of pieces as well that haven't necessarily been developed yet. And there's some places that are pretty strategic for some of this development, and then some of our partnerships. Another project that he didn't mention that is on the horizon is some expansions and plans within OTEC. The OTEC board approved recently a lineman program. And so building out on that end of town. Yeah. Nice. And so that's also in a kind of adjacent collaboration with Baker School District. Something that gets really confusing for those outside of Baker School District. Baker School District sponsors one of the largest virtual schools in the state. Something kind of unknown in K-12 about the way that works is that school has its own board and superintendent. So a lot of times it's wrapped in that the superintendent of Baker Schools gets to sort of dictate, drive, determine operations or support of that program, but it's really more of a business alignment with, superintendent to superintendent, maintaining that relationship. And then the other big program that gets referenced often is Baker Technical Institute. That is under the umbrella of Baker School District. Definitely, advertises and you see it as an independent entity, but it is fully operating within Baker School District. And that's the partnership that is also kind of a bridge with OTEC. And that bridge actually may exist as BTI as an entity. So it gets, as far as school districts go, we're really complicated. But yeah, so I can answer questions and kick it over to him in the optimism. He didn't say that 2 years of our entire conversation was about punching College Street through. There you
Yeah,
go.
so there's a couple of things to step up, and I apologize because I kind of whispered in her ear. So she was referencing the school district and OTEC partnership to bring a lineman school here, and I kind of wrote a letter of recommendations and everything when they applied. So they did get awarded 1.1 million to do that project here, and that'll be really helpful. We're also able to get part of a Department of Energy grant for 15 million that went through NEODD, and half of that is for Baker County Economic Development. I also did acquire 2.25 million in a capital funding request through legislature for the road that we were talking about, which sits in the bank account now at the county, just waiting for all the plans, everything to go through. We did full architecture and engineering master site plans, not full engineering and architectural plans for design. So we're in the site plan and conceptual plan phase. Theoretically, that'll be a 50 to an $80 million project when we get everything done out there. And it kind of does everything that everybody in every small town says they want to happen. They want all the businesses to do well, but they don't want their quality of life to change. So this will have people come, spend a lot of money, a couple of days later, go, and you'll be able to go to Main Street and walk really slow in any part of Main Street, not where the sidewalks are, not worry about a car hitting you because there are none. So that's the quality of life people like, but they also want their business to be successful. And so it was kind of hard to find something that fit that niche. And since we originally did that project and it got announced that we bought the land, we're moving forward, approximately 20 million in other investments have come in from other businesses, and they have gotten zero incentives from the county. And so that's been really nice. They've asked me a couple of times, I say no, and they say, okay. And buy the land, they build it anyway. So that's been a really great thing to see moving forward. And the partnership with the school district actually has been phenomenal the last few years and gotten better. And I think I told Aaron a story a few years ago when I didn't think partnerships were where they should be. And I literally invited the dean of a school in, another person in, people, a director, and the previous administrator from 5J, and locked him in my office. And I kind of said, it makes no sense for you guys not to work together on everything. And I, kind of got mas macho for a little bit and argued back and forth. But eventually I'd say, hey, aren't you guys working on this? And then aren't you guys doing this? And then they started talking past me and about all the things they can collaborate on. And by the time they were done, there were 7 things they realized they 100% needed to work on. And in regards to BTI and the other ones, I said, you guys need to start worrying about competition. You need to start promoting everyone. Figure out who does what part better and let them do it. And then take the rest of your time supporting every entity and the benefit. And they asked me through the process, they kind of turned to me and said, why are you so passionate, almost angry about this? And I said, here's my number, 43,800. They said, what's that? So that's what my daughters say by having dual credits from the colleges when she went to pre-med. She did it in 3 years instead of 4 years. 43,800 is my number of value that you guys can bring to this community by having dual credits for the kids and by working together on a regular basis and not trying to compete with each other, but rather to support each other. And I had 2 kids that did pre-med, so my number was a little bigger.
And I think that on these panels at times, so he is the ray of sunshine, I suppose. It's rained last night, so I will go that direction. So the interesting dichotomy in Baker is like what he's describing in this sort of thriving, or many of you got to walk downtown. Unequivocally, I'll say that Baker's downtown is the most beautiful main street in the state of Oregon. And when people want to come visit, I tell them to give themselves 2 days because it's striking because it's Baker, but it would take you 2 days to truly visit and spend time in each of the shops and eat the food down Main Street. But it's not the face of our students. That is not what we're seeing in the schools. And having been a K-12 student in Baker myself, the demographics have shifted drastically in the SES spaces. Our parents are struggling. There isn't high unemployment. There's 200 jobs, but somewhere in there is a mismatch of what our parents maybe have to offer or what they can do with what's open, available, or we do see a lot of underemployed. So sometimes they're employed, but not at a place that they can thrive. The district office is next to one of our finer establishments. And we often, I used to somewhat joke tongue in cheek because it was sad, that you should, do little tours and have students identify what drug is causing that effect right out our door. And so, but then honestly, because of where we were located, we had a first line of defense to finding out which students now lived there. And so I'd walk over and go kind of knock on a hotel door, find out, because you got what looked like a fifth grader popping out of the car, call the school. Do you know of a student staying here? No. So we'd go over and try to intervene. And then you start down this path of what the story in Eastern Oregon is most places is a lack of services and supports to wrap around these kiddos to provide the things that they need to thrive. So we, like you would hear from George, we heard last year in John Day, our counseling services are really lean. And there's a gap. If you have OHP, we can typically work it in New Directions as our local mental health provider. If you're private insured, it's really tricky to get services. And so we had this interesting challenge that our students within our schools could get the services we provide. Something in counseling that's becoming really challenging is that we are not a crisis counseling, we're school-based counselors. And so there's a point at which our counselors are supposed to hand off and refer out, but there's no refer outs available. And so our counselors within the schools are swamped because they're holding on to the students and maintaining constant contact counseling, which actually isn't what the national recommendations for school-based counseling look like. So your rural school counselors are actually crisis counselors and school counselors. And then you get to just general services. Housing is a nightmare. We really do not have housing available. We've talked at length in our meetings about housing options. Mr. Optimism here has all sorts of places in Baker that we could build and start facilitating. And there's some projects on the horizon to start chipping away at some of that. And with this new complex, there's some excitement about maybe what that looks like in pivoting some general uses in town, but we don't have housing. I'm actually a representative of that, right? So I don't know how many of you know my story. I ended up resigning as a superintendent because my family couldn't get moved over to Baker. So it's on both ends of the spectrums. I know there was actually a big demographic study in LeGrand that showed that too. Like we need lower end, but we also need some of the higher end housing because it creates this domino that pushes down into kind of the lower ranges of houses. There's nothing available. And what I found in trying to help my mother-in-law actually move here, kind of a lower income single person home, is anything that's available in a number that doesn't completely scare people away is unfinanceable because there's no foundation, there's other issues. So even if you get down into the numbers that somebody might be able to figure out, there's no financing. So then it's now unattainable because it's a cash only type setting. So housing is really hard in the county.
I might jump in here and just ask, from both your perspectives, given this situation and knowing that we have the Board of Trustees of the university here, of your local university, what role do you think Eastern could play in helping solve some of these problems. We're doing things, obviously, like our behavioral health array and really working to try to deliver back to the school districts. And we've heard from so many superintendents about what the needs are around student support services. But, you know, when we're building out businesses, we're investing in the communities. We hear a lot of times, you know, folks from the regional community say, I wish Eastern could do X for us, or we could really benefit from this. And so we're kind of interested to hear what role you think Eastern could play in this.
I'm going to brag on her. You need to do what Aaron did. The school needs to figure out a way to support families with childcare. The biggest thing that you can do is when the school district kind of picked up the ball that was kind of being dribbled and dropped here with some childcare, is they created an internal thing, kind of the first of its kind in the state. I'm
Not in this, no.
pretty close. I'm going to say it's the first kind ever I heard of. But it was fairly impressive. It met an immediate need. What that does is enable families then and spouses to be able to work. They did a poll at the hospital that said, how many of you that work at the hospital, doctors, nurses, if you had to have a second kid in child care, could still work? The number that came back was 0. 0. So if there isn't adequate child care, the educated, highly valuable spouses can't work anymore because it's not cost effective anymore. So by having the school system or the college system or whoever be able to create a scenario to where that can enable spouses to go back to work. We have a massive number of highly educated spouses that can't work because it's not cost effective. Being able to bring those people back into the workforce, you don't need housing for them. They already live here. You don't need to train them. They're already highly educated. You just need to create an environment to where they can go back to work.
And what he's referring to, the big hiccup I've found in childcare is childcare centers are unsustainably expensive and can't be. So we had a private entity, our local YMCA, that was running the childcare, and they backed out sort of for financial purposes. It felt a little 11th hour. So we put together and had a staff only childcare, which allows you to flex a few of the real stringent rules that make it as hard. Some of the staffing ratios expand slightly, some of the requirements. And so what we're seeing is that as the larger organizations within a community, if you can do an internal childcare, it really opened that door, and we hit our needed numbers to make it feasible fairly immediately. And it sounds like that's sustaining. As far as EOU, there's some things that are happening that I'm really excited about. The response to SLPs is wonderful, and having that right here to be able to grow. We've leveraged SLPAs often, and so to be able to have something local that we can then pivot them through their career and build them into that is really big. The other thing, and I wish Rayette was here, I've talked at length, I love that EOU has Rayette connected to TSPC. That's really powerful. And I'll continue to beat that. One thing that's tricky in the mental health space is how separate clinical versus school-based is. And so the more we can articulate the shared path and tell like small iterative differences, and be able to do so. I love EOU's endorsement only summer programs. That's been really impactful for our teachers. And if we could convince TSPC to do something different with our LCSWs and MSWs, they are clinicians. Let's give them a summer jumpstart to just get the TSPC side of the instruction and pedagogy. Let's give them the school-based thing. Chris is like jumping out of his seat. Are you?
Well, we have some new trustees, and
Oh.
some of your acronyms will be
Acronyms.
so SLCs, some people won't know the
Okay,
TSP.
sorry, SLP, because we mentioned SLP yesterday, speech and language pathologists. And they are very tricky to find, very critical staff, especially in our younger years. Lots of articulation training for our students experiencing autism. We do a lot of communication building with our SLPs in coordination with our SPED teachers. And then LCSW, I'm looking back there to what I know was kind of in the counseling space, licensed clinical social worker, and our MSW, the Master's of Social Work. So in both of those degrees, it sends you on a clinical track. So you can do like new directions in a lot of our partnerships. And in, Mauricio, you talked about bureaucracy yesterday. Here's one for you. We can contract back with an LCSW to do counseling within our buildings with some limitations. So we can have contracts with LCSWs. We cannot hire them as a school-based counselor. So, to be able to bridge those sort of licensure pieces, really what they're missing is the instructional component that's required for school-based counseling versus the clinicians don't teach. So Rayetta and I have talked a lot, and obviously she's enthusiastic and would drive forward trying to get some of those pieces, but anything like that kind of layers into some of these hard to fill positions. And I feel like EOU's always been so responsive to all of those suggestions. And we say it, and within a year, there's some sort of fledgling solution that's on the horizon. So I would say our biggest need is just to maintain the support of EOU so that we continue to have those pathways. The other thing that's been really neat for Baker in particular is the Teach Oregon and this focus on frontier schools. Not many people know, Mauricio really knows, we have a tiny 2-room schoolhouse that has between 20 and 25 students out in Keating. That's a frontier school. It's a neat place if you ever have a chance to go out there and see. It's an idyllic, like little community school, K-6. And we had a student teacher out there, and those teachers were so jazzed. They never get student teachers out there. And now there's a program that they have to go to Keating because the requirements of what you're doing in a frontier school, Keating is a setting that offers that. So that was really exciting last year to have our little Keating showcased, and that student teacher. It was fun. I went to the Haynes Stampede this year, and all of her she's in the stands and she's a celebrity just like teachers tend to be. And so to have more exposure to our frontier schools is really cool. And that's a program that I hope maintains support. And I know Ford Family is looking at ways to do more sustainable support of that too.
So another aspect how EOU can be a great partner. There's kind of the flexibility of what you teach. Years ago, there was a huge deficit in dental hygienists. So a lot of schools picked it up. But the thing is, that's like a 4 to 6 year window to try to catch back up for demand. Right now, there's like in the state of Oregon, 471 nursing position open. And so there was over 4,000 at the end of COVID. A lot of those people left the workforce industry. A lot of rural and Eastern, hospitals, medical facilities simply cannot attract or find. They can't get surgeons to come here to Baker. They couldn't get nurses. They had to downgrade multiple times because they physically did not have enough nurses to legally be a hospital. They physically did not have nurses to have, an OB. They legally did not have enough nurses to be, have a swing bed facility. All of those had to go away. They had to change their licensure structure to become a medical center because they no longer could be a hospital simply because they aren't there. So the flexibility, I guess, of colleges to adapt and to start offering things that kind of fill what's missing. Another part, and it kind of seems, basic, is there's a lot of homes like in Baker that don't meet the minimum standard, but having a program to where you're teaching people to have those skill sets to build a home, do the wiring, do the electrical, do the plumbing, and then having a program like some schools have done where they're actually building housing for teachers and being able to create a career for all the kids, create homes for the teachers, improve the community at the same time. It's a win-win-win scenario. Sadly, we know the effect isn't going to be like building a 30, 40, 100 unit complex for people, but what that domino effect has, you're training all these people to have a skill set they wouldn't have had before. You're meeting needs slowly, but as they come around, and hopefully over time be able to increase and improve the capacity to be able to build more, improve more properties. There's tons of them that it can be done that way in every single city. It is a mutual benefit to the city, to the community, to the people looking for better housing to have those programs in place, because then the tax rolls go up and you have more money for police, fire, or the maintenance. It's a win scenario.
I'm sure we have lots of questions for both of them. Go ahead and let's start. throwing them their way. Maurizio.
I don't have a question, I had a statement, and I need to say that Brian's presence in the county and the city is felt almost daily by many. And I hijack his place all the time. I invite myself in, hold some, they have big, beautiful 4 screens. I don't know how he does that, but he moves the images in 4 screens. Anyway, sometimes the small infrastructure that brings the community closer and the conversations about many of these issues, it really is a big asset. And what Brian has been doing here, it's really commendable.
So I owe you a few more lunches. Thank you. And
Thank-
just so you know, Maurizio buys lunch for everybody in some of the meetings we do. We hold what's called C to C meetings, cradle to career. We bring every single agency in that deals with every single aspect of, childcare support programs. And what we accomplish in those meetings, and, Maurizio is a huge positive part of that, is amazing. We literally will identify a problem. We will find out which agency has funding, which agency has capacity, and at the end of that meeting, we'll figure out how to have it happen. We've had lots of conversations in there just because we meet on a regular basis about problems, and then we start to think about, okay, how do we fix it? We don't just go in there and whine, we figure out, how do we fix it? And I think that's been the key. We brought the people to the table to have the capacity to make the decisions and to fix things. And to do that on a regular basis is priceless and exciting. I've never left a meeting not feeling educated or excited about something that we did and accomplished every single month. And Maurizio is a large part of that.
Yes, I have more than a question. Really have a question of Eastern. We are now hearing the community's needs. We're talking about counseling, nursing, probably other things. So what can Eastern do? How do we do that? In other words, we have to invest and put some money into programs to expand our program of counseling, expand nursing, maybe other things. But I think that to me is a challenge, and I'd love to hear a discussion about how we can do that.
Sure, sure. And I apologize. I put a mitt in my mouth thinking, oh, I'm not going to be on the microphone. So yeah, I think as Aaron suggests, we are working on meeting community needs. I apologize. The speech pathology program in particular, it's part of our application for the true PSU funding. That program and the MSW actually require getting accreditation prior to the start, which means you have to have people in place prior to them being able to create the monies that support their positions. And I don't need to tell people sitting around this table that we just created a more balanced budget, and we're not looking to upset that balance by doing this. So we're grateful to have that upfront funding to help launch that program. And I think Erin brought up a really good point, and it's something I've talked with Rayette quite a bit about, because I know after the launch of the speech pathology, it is her aim, and I know her and Peter and others have already been in talks about trying to find ways to connect the clinical with the teaching side. So creating an adaptive curriculum. Because those two programs have different accrediting agencies, of course, it does require difficulty because, for example, the clinical mental health counseling has certain numbers of individuals per instructor. The teacher side will have a different one, and then they'll want their course names called this, and they'll want their course names called that. So it just requires, I think, digging into the curriculum. But we are, I think, looking to support in any way we can. I'm always very cognizant of the fact that EOU was founded as a teacher's college, and it just makes sense that be an area of growth and really, acclaim in our community. Everywhere I go, that's what people talk about, how we do build great educators. And then on the other piece, that emerged, actually, EOU is also concerned about the lack of workforce due to, I agree with you, it's a problem of childcare. And so we've actually started early talks with several community leaders to try and find solutions. EOU, again, as everyone around this table knows, we're not in a position to financially support the building of a daycare. We don't have the monies delivered to EOU that like K-12 partners do. But we do realize that we have really skilled and experienced individuals as well as students who can help in the building of something. And so we are working with several community partners. I think our next meeting September, that will be a very slow moving process. And it's one in which, I think everybody who has graciously sat at that table with us, as we've had these early talks, no one's willing to promise anything, because it has to be something that doesn't undercut each of our institutions' ability to thrive. It's kind of like the prison program. We want to be excellent partners in this community, but we cannot fund every single thing that comes out of it. We need our partners' support. And so far, it's going well. We're very early stages, but it is something we've had multiple conversations about.
And I'll add one more program that EOU has really been responsive to is administration. So there's kind of some fledgling, not even fledgling anymore. It's really rising to the top for school administrators. One thing we found within the state in administrative programs that's come up often is how irrelevant it is to teaching in a rural space at times. The context of the classes can be really disjointed from the reality of what it looks like to be a superintendent and a principal. And, just in the 21 districts that are kind of in our immediate region, not necessarily Malheur County, but there's over half of them that have that kind of a role. So that's another program that EOU said, well, I think we could expand and do that. And again, it takes a little time. It's another set of different requirements and qualifications, and our licensing body isn't always the easiest to work with. But that was another response that we were just kind of spitballing and saying, this is also hard. And EOU said, well, I think that we could maybe do that. So that's in the works as well.
So just as a reference, in a report I received a couple of days ago when Rachel was at the meeting as well, right now, the childcare program in the school is not at a negative. They're making more money that supposedly they're bringing in. The cost, I guess, to run a difference between running it through the school and everything is minimum 250,000. You have to have 3 certified people of certain wage levels in order to run it. If you run it in a separate agency running through the school, you just need basically a certified teacher doing it. And you also have a phenomenal capacity of support. I know when the kindergarten was in the high school, it was probably one of the most positively received things from everyone. And the information that the kids got being able to help with that program was phenomenal. The attention that the younger children got being in that environment from the high school kids was phenomenal. There's ways to integrate things. And I always look at things through a business lens. And I always try to tell people, and I won't mention because I'm on the budget board of another college, you're a business, you're an entity, you got to pay the bills. And if you can't pay the bills, you're not operating anymore. So I understand that completely. Counties and cities, they do things which are philanthropic or the good of the city, good of the community, and they understand that's a cost. And I understand colleges have to pay the bills. So there's ways to figure around that. One of the biggest things is to have, I would create basically a PR program, call it social media, whatever, promoting everything that you guys do every single day, every single person, and have the kids be part of that in your school. You have a phenomenal capacity to do major positive outreach. And I credit that to the school even passing the last bond. They actually brought a person in who paid attention to a lot, started telling all the positive stories, all the good things. When that happens, people want to be part of it. People will want to give money to that. Agencies, grant foundations, other places will want to support the things that you're doing. And it enables, because I know colleges have a lot of big dollar items they have to do. And sometimes that has to be done through a grant program. And to create an entity or a division that does that would be a positive thing because grant writers are in extremely high demand. There's a lot of funds out there. They just don't have the capacity, grant writers, to write the grants, to do them. And I've worked with Brenda on tons of these different ones. So we realize, there's tons of things in need that don't exist. But that's another avenue that you guys could do to have that capacity, to give people that skill set, bring those tools in, which will benefit the school. Create a grant writing certification and then have them write a few $1 million grants for you guys at the same time.
And I'll piggyback on Brian on the childcare. We're actually not able or allowed to have any school funds support that program because it creates a pay equity issue. And so if there was any gap between what the revenue and expenditures were in that preschool or not preschool, childcare program, we would have to basically allocate and identify for each person that is partaking in that childcare, what is that additional revenue the school's putting in divided by that number, and that's now the benefit that we're providing to that staff member that others don't get. And we'd have to make up that difference in like a pay setting. So like Brian said, it is a net neutral because it has to be, but because of the open constraints that we're able to navigate by being a entity only, employee only childcare, we've been able to keep it penciling net neutral. Not any more than that, but it's net neutral. The other thing is that you have to align your rates with the regional or community rates for unlicensed childcare. You can call yourself unlicensed, so it gets to be the lowest cost on the tier. But if we were to charge any different than what we get from our childcare, trackers, then that again would be considered a benefit because we're in essence by what we're charging, providing a subsidy to that staff member. So it is a net neutral program. There's a lot of research in how those have to be done in order to be built. Things like the hospital have more flexibility because they don't necessarily have to have it be a neutral cost, but public entities do. So it's been a good program. Similar with our rent, we have a house here in Baker that we've converted to employee housing. It's actually a sort of a yeah, it's rooms. You're not in apartments. Like you're sharing a home with other people. But what was cool about that is Baker, we were able to comprehensively change our compensation structure for our licensed staff 2 years ago. We haven't had a license opening in 2 years, yay. And with that, in combination with this house option, we've recruited a pretty phenomenal band teacher. I was just talking last night about Ben, and having the ability for him to stay in that home because of the situation with interest rates and that he'd, lose money selling his house in Idaho, he's able to do both. So he's been living in the house for 2 years. And then with BTI, there's some sort of transient type roles. They're on the road a lot. So there was a guy that came from Pennsylvania that didn't need to have something permanent and that cost associated. So he was able to rent a room for just the few days here and there that he landed. As staff move, some of them have come and stayed in there for 2 months while they transitioned. And it takes that burden of stress and panic of my entire family has to come right now, but we don't know where we're going to land. They've been able to come earlier and then get transitioned in a more comfortable way. So I think anything like that, because we are pretty pinched for housing, we found that this, it's intended to be somewhat of a transitional, non-permanent housing option has been really utilized and really impactful as well. I don't know that that's what we set out for it to be, but that's it's really opened our eyes to saying we really need kind of the entity-based short-term housing options. Like what is Airbnb for a school district? And having that available has been really great. And when we bring in speakers and things like that, we throw them up in the house. And so then there's actually a lot lower cost to us when those folks come into town.
Brenda.
So Brian, you've done a lot of youth entrepreneur work, and we've worked a lot on that. I am interested in how we build that pipeline, right? Even into EOU. And I don't know, I'm just always, the entrepreneurial aspect of how we can sort of move that into higher ed is intriguing to me.
So in the past, I've had some great partnerships with the EOU and, working with the Rev and bringing basically interns down and have them work. And so I worked with them. We create a job description. We get a student that's, interested in working in that area. And I've actually hired them to work on projects, and it's been really, really successful. So it's kind of a two-way street. I think bringing the people from EOU here to work with the kids to do that, but also to give kids that career mindset. We've done a really good job the last few years with job fairs and career fairs at the high school. Last year's was unbelievably successful. And I think that's probably where EOU maybe isn't doing enough. Kids don't realize what a phenomenal asset EOU is. Um, I try to explain to kids all the time, I'm pretty sure that when you get a 4-year degree and you go there, the place hiring you doesn't have a pay scale based on where you went, unless it was like Harvard or Yale maybe. But 99% of degrees, you're applying for a job, you have the degree. It doesn't matter after that. And so to be able to go to EOU and get some of your basics out that are transferable is priceless, or to get your 4-year there is priceless. It's a way better, ROI, return on investment. That would be a good AI thing. If as we speak, the acronyms would show on the screen of what they really mean. I don't know. Somebody get on that. But that's kind of the thing for, I've gone into the high schools and been able to have conversations and work with the kids. And I've also worked with FBLA and FFA kids on, different aspects of competition, state and national competitions, and develop that mindset, give them the tools to where they can go to college, you get that degree, and then move forward to the next steps. And I think that's critical to start in the high schools, to have that connection, have that physical face at the high school, talking to the kids about what you have to offer, having that conversation about the career opportunities, the direction, and the other avenues you can take. The capacity and the impact is massive, and it's lost. I'm always excited when I see kids that are making the decision to go to EOU, because from a math standpoint and a business standpoint, I'm just cheap. So whatever gets you that return for the least amount of money and achieves the goal is the priceless thing you need to do. But there's a couple things that are missing. One of the biggest thing that's missing is professionalism. Yesterday, I met with a group of several kids that came up from halfway, and they're in an entrepreneurship summer program to where they're creating a business, developing, actually opening and starting a business. We were talking about registering their business, doing all the stuff, talking about payroll, getting them an accountant. Wait, these are 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old kids. And we're having these conversations. But it's priceless to give them that tools and that mindset. But then also, we do something when we do the job fair. We say, tell the colleges to talk to the businesses and say, what classes would we love you to offer so we can hire them? So we will give them a job. The last job fair we had over 200 jobs sitting in that room. We brought in 100 and some high school kids to talk to them and to have that presence from EOU there, which they did, to have a person be that face. But that face needs to be not sporadic. You need to have somebody who physically goes in and has a conversation on a regular basis, has a working relationship with the teachers, with the programs. And also thinking about that youth entrepreneur concept, because that spurs them to higher education. That spurs them to getting the next level of classes and they're doing. I was in Chicago when we met with a whole bunch of major universities, and they were talking about creating a degree, an entrepreneurship degree. University of Texas and other ones there that had massive enrollments of over 100,000 kids. And they talked for a couple hours about how they realized something was missing. People were coming out of colleges with MBAs. They would go into a business and they could tell you this number is 45. And they say, well, is the business making any money? Well, I know how to do this formula, I know the number is 45. Are they making any money? The 45, that's right, isn't it? So they don't have that concept. They're missing pieces, that entrepreneurial understanding, that perception of what it takes to run a business, overhead, cash flow. They can do the spreadsheets, they can do the math, they've read the books, they've read the studies, but to go into a business and to be able to be a productive asset right away doesn't exist. And so as they're talking, they're saying they identified several things that were needed to bring their MBAs up to the level they needed to. And they were trying to create this new degree. And I felt bad because I kind of spoke up, as I tend to do. I raised my hand halfway through and I said, you guys know there's a problem with your MBA degrees. You've identified the solution. You've spent 4 to 5 years trying to create this degree. You're getting a lot of fight back. And so why don't you add those requirements into your MBA instead of creating a new one? And the one lady from University of Texas said, well, that would just be a good idea. And I feel like I kind of took all the joy out of the room for the whole session. But as a college, if you guys could just figure out those little things that you're missing, I know you have restrictions, you have guidelines. That entrepreneur picture is priceless. Because if I hired somebody and they came into my business and a few weeks into the job and say, yeah, you know, if you did this or this, you can increase your revenue by 8%. I'm like, what, am I being pranked? Is this a trick? But giving them those tools and that ability to look at things differently. I tell businesses all the time, the goal when you hire somebody is when you go into a business, and we know this in less than 10 seconds, employee or owner. When I go into a business, I want to walk up to somebody and not know. I want that person to be so empowered, to be so supportive, to be so aware of what's going on in that business. I don't know if they're the owner or not. That's the goal of what you need to kind of teach people, that entrepreneur mindset, that independent ability to make those choices and decisions. And I remember when I was in a meeting with somebody in the back there a few years ago, and we were at the high school, and we were talking about FFA kids. And every professor kind of chimed in and said, yeah, if I have a kid from FFA, I don't have to worry about them understanding how to show up on time, do their work, be there. Everybody kind of probably never had that conversation intentionally. Everybody agreed with it. It's because of one simple factor. They've all ran a successful business. They buy a cow, they buy the feed, they calculate the hours of doing it, they do the show, they know what it needs to sell for, they know the return, they know the process, they start and close the business, and they see the revenue net return at the end. And I love listening to high school kids, 15 years old, having conversations with friends. You know, I think next year I'm going to get a pig because it takes this much last hour to show. Feed costs this. I could have a better rate of return. And I'm like, wait, what? You're not worried about what's happening on social media or who's doing whatever it is? Well, I mean, to the same degree. Well, I have to say, I was shocked. I met with, these kids from, halfway that came up. And I was trying to use a reference of, how often do you text a friend and use professional techniques, and which is a whole nother conversation. All of them but one didn't have a cell phone. High school kids. I was blown away because I felt justified now all the time. I told my kids they didn't need one. And their argument was, well, all of my friends have one. And I said, awesome, then you don't need one. Because if all your friends have one, you can just use theirs. They didn't like that analogy. But that's the entrepreneurial part. That's the mindset. That's the things that you guys can teach and give them the tools, which will get them excited about the higher education, the tools. And I tell kids all the time, never stop, and adults, making yourself more valuable. Never stop getting more certifications. Never stop getting more degrees, more things to make you more valuable to yourself. And I tell them literally when they apply for jobs to tell that to the business. Ask them that question. What kind of trainings or certifications do you have to make me more valuable? And use those words, not for you, me. Because that'll make you more valuable for them. Did I
Brian,
answer everything?
Mauricio, I think you had a question.
I was just going to say, I think one thing he's touching on that's surprising to me when I was watching and at the career fair, or as we start hearing our seniors' plans or even juniors in the fall, EOU is not any different in the minds of Baker of any other college or university kind of in a list of the short list of the ones that they consider. It feels as far away. It feels as separate, different as, Washington State. Or I don't know what MSU does, but there is a pipeline of Eastern Oregon and Western Idaho to Montana State that we need to research and look into and figure out, why does everybody go to Montana State? And so I think that that's something that I've kind of watched from the wings, especially being in my role here as a trustee and then being in Baker, is when you talk to Baker high school students, EOU is not different in the list. There's not necessarily a set apart. And so I've always kind of wondered why that is or how that is. And the best I can figure is there's not any more of a face behind EOU than there is for OSU's recruiters that come over. Or, you've got some Washington State, or, our touch points are not much different in number or time in a lot of ways at the high school than the other colleges and universities. The difference often is that if we can help communicate back some of the opportunities that students have to go down the road 40 miles to go onto campus, those usually sell it. And the students who go to those opportunities that are really valuable come back really engaged with EOU and wanting to go there. So how we bridge that communication, I'm always envious when I talk to George because it is easier when it's right there. But having some of these pilot programs that are literally, we've got an office in a high school in LeGrand. So of course you're going to get LeGrand students. We're 40 miles away and we see EOU about as much as we see anyone else. And so that's always kind of stuck with me. Like he mentions, the college fairs, great touch point, but it's among 200 other professionals and a lot of information that's being thrown at them there, and other colleges come to that career fair as well. And so how do we position EOU as a more viable option? Because like what Brian's bringing up, for a lot of our families, it is the option that they should be considering. There's so many more valuable reasons to go to EOU over trying to go to WSU or Montana or wherever else that they go down the road to. So I think that's something that we could grow at in Baker County. I don't know why there's the deep chasm, like Union to Baker County. I feel that sometimes when I was trying to, collaborate for a number of different things, we're not that far away, but yet that Blue Mountain must actually be a 14-foot summit. So that's something that I've wondered about, is how to bridge those 40 miles a little better.
A couple of things, linking back to what Brenda asked, youth, that's a word, and youth, and you mentioned, Brian, professionalism. I know that the Baker School District through BTI inserted something in their curriculum that they call the employability index or thing. So it doesn't matter how good of a welder you become, but are you employable as a welder? Are you going to be showing up on time? Grant County, last week, 10 days ago, they announced the closure of Maller Lumber. 76 jobs, 70 years of operation, permanently closed, losing 70 jobs in John Day, 75, plus the additional thing. It's huge. At the top of the reasons that place is closing was a workforce that was not reliable and it did not pass drug tests. So we can build whatever we want, we can have whatever we want, but the question to you is, do you see a role for the current staff? Do you see a role for EOU to weave some of these things in? So once you get your diploma, once we graduate, once we show the liberal arts and the other great things that also make you more employable or more ready to enter the workforce that is needed, reliable professional.
So I work with kids. It's kind of seems silly. But it's amazing the impact it has. The first thing that I did yesterday with the kids, and they came in for Youth Entrepreneur, taught them how to shake hands. You think it's a simple and easy thing, or think it's something that we do as a practice. It is not. You think it's something.
Do you want me to act like a high schooler, or do you want me to do it?
I'll kind of go through the demo, then I'll let you try and see how many things you get correct that I might have shared before. So here's the normal introduction of a normal person when they're meeting another person, adult, high school, whatever it is. That's it.
You looked at me though.
Yeah, sometimes, or they go, they shake their hand, they think, they look down, they look away, do things. And everything really, hey, my name's Brian. The impact that you can have by doing 5 specific steps is massive. The chance to make yourself memorable is priceless. And there's one thing I did at EOU when I was doing classes there, and there was some dean that was sitting in there and they were laughing like crazy how I finished it, and I'll show you. But all right, you're in my. Yeah, there's 4 things. 4 things. I'll do it one time. Let's see if you guys can pick up on it. How you doing? My name's Brian. What's your name? Aaron. Aaron. So what was different than what she did? Anybody? Put your hand up if you want. What? Close. Anybody? Yes. What else? There's one critical thing people miss. No, close. You're so almost dead on. There's one little thing that you have to do that's intentional. It's a hesitation. You literally stop and you can watch people's faces. When I did this at even TVCC, that about 7, 8 professors, I said, I want to watch 250 kids go from being awkward like that and watch their body language change. Their shoulders drop, they're relaxed, and they don't know why. You're going to show them that meeting them was intentional. It was important. You're not in a hurry to walk away. You heard what they said. You repeated it back to them. You confirmed that, and that you then followed it up by a positive reinforcement. You're getting visual, verbal, physical, all at the same time in audio. The same time in a few seconds. You have one chance at a first impression. Make it impressionable. That's simple. Hi, my name's Brian. What's your name? Aaron. Great to meet you. Very few people can do the hesitation. It's not easy. I want you guys to practice it next time you meet somebody. I always tell kids to go back and like introduce themselves to their parents. I work with kids during a summer program about, every time you go to the job and you have somebody you meet out of respect, you go back and you shake their hand again. When you do presentations for FBLA, you shake every single judge's hand and you re-say your name. And they say, well, that's crazy. They're sitting next to each other. And I said, think about it. What do they think about later on when they're doing that tally sheet and they're comparing you from one person to the other one? Oh, that was Quinn. Yeah, that was that Quinn kid. You made yourself memorable. You made yourself stand out. I also work with kids on kind of the 5 things that you ask an employer when you go into the room. How you approach somebody for a job. Most people have no idea coming out of college and they're scared to death. I know doctors, lawyers, because some of my kids and do things, they don't know how to initiate a conversation. But the things they do is priceless. The first thing I always tell them is ask them what the pay range is. Because you don't want to assume because you're new there that you earned it, which a lot of people with a degree believe they're going to get that, high number just because they showed up. You want to find out the pay ranges. So this goes from this point to this point for that position. The next critical thing you ask them is this a forever position? Will I take this and retire from it 25 years later? Or is this a stepping stone within your company? Is there other places for me to go within your company that will be something I can look forward to figure out where my niche is, where, my passions are, where I can be more successful at? The next thing I always tell them is what trainings and certifications do you have to make me more valuable? What do you offer? It's always fun when you put businesses on the defensive in an interview. Oh, well, we offer all kinds of this. We'll do this for you and everything. Cool. One of the most critical things I always tell them to ask, because most businesses do a horrendous job when they hire people about giving people this information. What am I doing Monday morning at 8:00? I know what the job description is. I know what the title is. What am I doing? Who do I ask questions of? Where do I go for this? So many people just show up here. They've done a horrendous job of onboarding, getting them on. Not very many places, schools always have great onboarding programs they do way in advance. Most businesses are horrendous at that. They just don't have it. My favorite thing I always tell college kids or high school kids going for a job is to tell them this. Tell them when you're going to quit. Sounds really crazy, isn't it? If you're there for a summer job and you say, I'm going back to college on September, whatever it is, because I'm going to go to school for this, and this I'm going at, they will hire you because of that. And they will hire you back because of that. Those are simple conversations things. This is my next favorite thing that I teach people to do that most people never teach people to do. And you guys have all been part of these conversations hundreds of times and made you feel awkward, uncomfortable. I'm going to use you again. Please stand up. So when I did this at TBC, it was kind of fun. I always tell people the important thing is when you meet somebody, you create a reason, it's intentional. And when you leave that conversation, you create a kind of exit conversation. You know in your head what you're going to do. If it's an interview, then you paint the picture. Like, hey, I look forward to working for you. What time do you guys start on Monday? I always tell them like, well, 9. Okay, be there. But don't always have to say that.
there's things that you can do which are critical, which people don't do. When you guys go to meetings like this and everybody's mingling, this is the hardest thing for people to do is how to finish a conversation. How many times have you done this? Oh, hey, it was a great meeting. They don't know how to end a conversation professionally and respectfully. They don't know how to be clear about what they're doing. And I always say, think about that during your conversation. Pick up a point of your conversation, how you can finish that and create a reason for a next conversation, a reason for creating that sphere of influence, the people that you're working with. Say, hey, Aaron, it was a great meeting and everything. I'm looking forward to working with you on everything that you're doing. Have a good one. Critical point is, you have to don't stand there. Don't act confused. Don't let them like do that thing like, okay. How many of you guys have been in that social environment where you've done those things? You have to walk away. You can't leave them confused. They said they were done. They finished it. They gave me that closing statement. So when I did it at TVCC, I always finish up telling the kids to practice that exit conversation. So I have like 70, 100 kids stand up and they're doing all these conversations. And I know it's right at the end of when I'm doing the class or whatever it is. And I say, I have one question for everybody. So what's the most important thing about an exit conversation? They say, walk away. I said, what are you still doing here? Get out. They got to learn to walk away. Don't be confusing. Sorry. Went off on a tangent again.
Well, this turned out to be an excellent format. Thank you, Aaron and Brian, and it was, I thought, very beneficial. Thank you. I did have one quick question on the childcare thing. A couple years ago, Richard and I went to a hearing in Ontario with our representatives and senators that were there. And I think the majority of the people that spoke or gave testimony were childcare workers wanting help, that there were not enough of them, the pay, and I kind of wanted to ask you, do you, and Tim probably could answer this as well. It seems like we overregulate so many entities, and not that we do not want safe childcare, but we overregulate them out of existence so that we can't meet all those regulations, and it's not just childcare, it's multiple issues. But do you agree with that, or?
So that's the entire premise of employee childcare, is that a lot of those constraints are things that have easier workarounds. The example I gave is we do house Head Start with our kindergarten. We have an early learning center, and we're actually moving it out into modules because of that, so that we don't have to be considered a childcare center for our kindergarten, because that created some challenges, but now it's still like on campus and collaborative, but not in the same building. But the example I'll give is, as a childcare center, we have a director of that building that is just shy of her PhD in special education and has been an educator for 30 years and is not qualified immediately to get licensed to teach or supervise any of the teachers in that program. So it took us 6 months to get her any kind of ability to individually supervise or go into that classroom and step in for somebody if they had an emergency and had to get pulled out. So it's impossibly difficult. That conversation's happening often. The other gap we found in Malheur County, you probably saw, they do pyramid, I think that's what they call them. But they have a lot of a migrant population, so there's a lot of funding for migrant childcare. They just have some tiers that in Union and Baker County aren't as immediately accessible. So that's the other thing that we struggle with, is we have low SES, not low enough in some places. And the ones that struggle the most within childcare are actually the ones that fall kind of outside of what we know in that Head Start range of qualification. So like what Brian's pointing to, the hardest child care challenge that we faced were the two-person employed household that fell outside of the range of any kind of support. So even when you get to an ERDC in order to provide ERDC, then you have regulations that then you have to charge them. It's just this kind of constant snowball of challenge, but it's really employed persons that fall outside of any support tier.
Yeah, well, I guess the broader point here is we have overregulated so many facets of things in Oregon that cause multiple issues down the road. And not that we don't want to have safeguards and things, but so we need to talk to our legislators and get some of that changed so that we are able to have upcoming jobs, upcoming businesses, upcoming childcare, and not be overregulated beyond.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. And there's another domino effect in that process. Funding falls under what's called slots. So childcare slots, payments, subsidized things, counties, cities, they all run into different slots available. Like when the Y here stopped doing it, they lost 10 slots. Those kids didn't go away. The money did. Because those slots couldn't be reallocated. So I'm on another board. So we're fighting to trying to figure out a way to have those slots kind of always stay in the community and allow a regional entity kind of to reallocate those slots. Same thing happened in Wallowa. They had a daycare closed, lost all the slots. Money's still there, kids are still there, can't move it to another one. Gone. Can't get it back. And so then you talk about the regulation. So the regulation with the BELC and other stuff, in order to be a license, they have to have a supervisor, which have to have so many points of certification, which is crazy. And then you have to have two other people under them, which have to have high level supervision capacity and certification as well, which is crazy. The minimum payroll to start a licensed facility, 250,000. That means you have no assistance, no overhead, no budget, and yeah, and only a minimum of 10 kids. And so the math doesn't work. And so then you have other entities who are willing to pay in and help start that and subsidize it, but then they all want that care for free because they're paying into it. So now you have a massively dependent model. And then when the money didn't happen because of regulation restrictions, the domino fell away. The Y thought they could pick it up. They realized they were inheriting a model where they told everybody they didn't have to pay, which doesn't really work. And so then they had to cancel it. Then the school had to kind of panic, and you really need to utilize this person moving forward to figure out how to do it at EOU, whatever that looks like, because I would love to see an evolution of the process to where laws are changed to enable them to be part of the child care process. I approached years ago when Jerry Peacock was at the school and superintendent, like over 20 years ago, and I said, I would love to see child care in the schools, every school. And the reason is you have a massive domino benefit. You have people in the community still have a choice to go to a Montessori, other stuff, and pay for private one. But then you have people in the school. Then you're teaching the kids, all the kids would have a requirement. They would have to go to 1 hour a day of that class. They would learn parenting skills they're not getting probably at home. They would learn, the ability of interacting, working with kids, dealing with toddlers. And it would probably be the best pregnancy prevention class they could ever do. If high school kids had to deal with 2 and 3-year-olds all day long, every single day. I don't know. There's so many positives and so much capacity that could happen in that environment. That would be my dream for where this could evolve, and it would be allowed to not have to follow all the restrictive regulations, but then offer it to more and to have it be beneficial.
Thank you very much. Obviously, there's a lot of things to cover. We're out of time, but really, really appreciate you showing up, Brian. You are a rock star for Baker County because your other 3 people didn't make it. So thank you so much. And Aaron, thank you so much for your input. That worked out really well, probably better than anything else. So thank you. We will take a short break and then we will move into the next agenda items. So we'll take about a 5 to 10 minute break. I'll pound when we're done. I'll bring my maul next time. Thank you, everyone. You know, you meet people in life that impress you in different ways. And I'm just going to say a word about Beanie. She has such a big heart and such passion for what she does that I just want her to know how much we appreciate you. And then the guy sitting beside her, I don't even want to get started on his wonderful qualities. So we are honored to have both of you for the DEIB presentation. I apologize for the lateness.
I just want to say, I wish now I could walk around and shake all of your hands.
I agree. Yeah. And thank you also for this time. It's always a pleasure to come and meet with all of you and share the work that we're doing. Also, thanks to Peter for being here. It's not as daunting when you're sitting here. So I really appreciate Peter being here and being part of this presentation with us. The purpose, as you know, is a DEI information and update around what we're doing. Specifically for today, two questions were asked that we want to address today is what are the barriers for our students and what are we not doing to meet student needs? So as we aim to provide an inclusive and a supportive educational environment for our students, it's crucial to recognize and address specific obstacles that hinder our student success. Also know that some of the topics that I'll share today is not unique to EOU. These are very much common challenges that other universities and colleges are experiencing in higher ed. There also may be other challenges that our students face that are not this topic today. But I wanted to also share that how we identified and really bubbled up what I'm going to be talking about today was based on some work that we were already doing. Thinking about those challenges. We were really identifying who are our marginalized students, and that can be students from different race and ethnic backgrounds, first generation, low income, Pell eligible, students with gender, sexual orientation, immigration, rural, or economically coming from under-resourced or economically fragile backgrounds and communities, just to name a few. And oftentimes, those students don't just have one of those things. There's intersecting identities that they have, and those combinations can also create larger barriers for them. Students don't always know what it means to be aware of their experiences. Sometimes they only know the trauma or the hurt, and that can be really hinder their ability to self-advocate or even build relationships and trust to allow them to ask for what they need. So because of these students who come from different backgrounds and have unique challenges, navigating college experience with very limited family support or any kind of support is really apparent. They deal with financial constraints that make it harder to afford many things, including tuition and living expenses. It also means that they have the potential to overcome obstacles and succeed in college. And so what we're seeing from how we're really talking about these are students that we have supported who come from these backgrounds. We worked with our retention coordinator and we looked at some of the support that we were giving students who were reported as early alerts or students who were on academic probation. And these are narratives and also qualitative data that we were asking based on how we needed to understand the students, what their challenges were, and how we then can think about ways to support them. Again, there are many things that are already being done on campus that we're doing this year and have been doing, but this also allows us to continue to better understand what barriers and challenges students face. I think one of the other things that I guess I want to also mention is that these were also part of our already stated student success efforts. and also the sense of belonging objectives in Title III. So even before this, I was actually really excited to hear that I had to answer this question because we were already asking ourselves, what do they look like? How do we know what they look like so that we can be able to position ourselves to better serve our students, continue to do that. One of the documents that I had worked with some of the team in doing in different settings was a document called Barriers Faced by Students at EOU. So these two questions were really timely, and we tried to center them on 4 equity-minded principles. And you've heard me talk about this before several times, so I'll repeat them again. Recognizing the ways in which systemic inequities disadvantage minoritized people in a range of social institutions and contexts, and that's education, employment, healthcare, many other systems. Reframing student outcomes and disparities as an indication of institutional underperformance rather than students' perceived deficits based on their identities, life circumstance, or capabilities. Not comparing the performance of minoritized and poverty-affected student against an arbitrary standard set by resource students, and then framing that the academic progress of the former as deficit. And then reflection was a big key, critically reflecting on our own role and responsibility in creating equity on campus. This reflection was essential for recognizing how we may unintentionally perpetuate inequities or fail to address systemic barriers that affect student success. So those were some of the ways we had thought about how we want to keep that in mind as we serve students and work with students. So the sheet that you have and also the attachment were some of the things that I'm talking about today. Obviously, this is financial constraints is a big challenge that students face. We often know that our students often do not have the means to be able to graduate college without debt. We know that FAFSA and Pell Grant is not enough to support the overall cost. I was looking at changes in the FAFSA, even though it's coming up around 7,000, but the average student probably gets between 5,000 and 7,000. And if the cost of college is 27,000, how they supplement that with scholarships is a challenge for them. Many students struggle too, and they're very aware of that. They're struggling even before they get here. Students cannot afford college even if they're prepared, and they're making that decision to either come to school or not. Those who attend have to take loans to try to complete the timeline, and others stay longer to sometimes rack debt in order to continue. And even when students, we're seeing that even when students who are in part-time mode, if they don't have a strong support system that continues to remind them of their why, there's high likelihood of them dropping out. And we often want to try to keep those part-time, try to help those students become full-time. Living expenses is also a big challenge for our students. Obviously, when we talk about college, we're always talking about student and fees, but it's the whole person requires many other expenses. We just did a report for this last July, and it was really interesting because summer is very slow for us. But our food pantry, we served 456 students in July and 156 households, and in summer. So it really shows, some of the needs that our students have and the challenges that can become decisions to whether they continue or not. Often students do not have awareness and understanding of financial aid or scholarships, not just institutional, but how do they access outside scholarships? What does that look like? There's no support in maybe understanding how to navigate the FAFSA. Even me as a parent, I'm still navigating what that looks like for my students. So it's not just first generation, it's that the system changes all the time. They don't know, this was mentioned by a dean before, we don't have a good understanding of what's considered a good loan versus a bad loan. And how do they go about doing that? Depending on students' relationship with parents, oftentimes the plus loan is offered as a way to supplement, and not every student is able to. And we hear this a lot where their parents were not interested in taking those plus loans. Also, they struggle to have that conversation, because the conversation to come to college really was clear that it was them investing on themselves. And so that's one things I've heard with saying, now I have to go talk to my parents just to tell them to deny it. And so that I can then be offered other things. How do I do that? If a student comes from foster care, if they have a different family scenario, were raised by grandparents, that just complicates so many other things that they don't know how to. Peter is going to help me with academic preparation. I think there's a lot more that I don't know, but that is an area of concern for students coming from, rural backgrounds. They might be in under-resourced schools, but also the challenges and maybe the academics of how they prepare to college is not the same in high schools. They struggle with college level work. We've seen that in some of the students who get reported. It's very high stress. They're in the way the setting of the classroom is not what they're used to. Even students talk about, right now, I struggle with being able to understand the professor. The language is different, even if they know what that is, they're just not able to do that. And there's not a lot of good maybe study habits. In the last month as I was traveling, we spent a lot of time talking to students about memorization versus like critical thinking, and how you need to think about what that looks like as you prepare to come to college, and what skills are available, what resources are available to help you develop those skills. Anything?
Yeah, maybe we can talk later about the things that we're already doing, yeah, but we are trying to address it, and it's a long process. The Title III grant certainly helps with the remedial, with the developmental math. That was a long process so far. We're trying to shorten that by more intensive instructions, more group work, and new pedagogy, right? We now have a year's worth of data, right? We have to look at it and see how we can further improve. But it involved a lot of people process, it involved funding, and as we address these issues and do our best to get students on a path to success. I also want to mention that we ran some data, the EOU for new freshmen. Those who get an F in one of the first 2 quarters, 65% of them are not retained. So this early intervention, this early support, this early care, is critically important for our retention, but also for the students to stay on a path forward.
Thank you. Another thing that we're seeing is some of the challenges with extracurricular activities. If those are tied to coursework, depending on their ability, if they're working, that limits their ability to continue to be engaged and involved. But it also limits their ability to network and build a sense of community. And that continued sense of isolation can really be impacting their ability to feel like they're part of the campus community. Remedial courses, we hear that a lot with students. Peter just talked about it. It's costly for students, but it also, there's a higher dropout rates for them if they continue to not pass those courses. Support system, as we know, first generation, but also students with working parents. We're hearing from our students who have parents who went to college, but there's also struggling navigating the system and knowing what that looks like. They also don't know what questions to ask, and oftentimes feel stigmatized that they're not college prepared, right? And so some of the things that they don't know, maybe even simple things like terms. What's the difference between my high school counselor and now my academic advisor? What do those look like? They now have a class that they go 3 times, and so that's 3 hours in one day when they were used to 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. and don't know how to manage what that in between free time looks like. And so those are some of the ways that, or some of the things that we're hearing from just thinking about what time management can look like. Advising and counseling. So this is something that, we continue to work on, but the students also, in some of the students shared with us that they just don't have a clear understanding. They know what they want to do, but that career pathway, the academic pathway and the career pathway, which we're already talking about and doing, that is not as clear. So, Dr. Ryan talked about knowing your why, understanding like what is that path that you're taking now to prepare for what potential jobs and careers you would get. And sometimes because of that get missed along the way, that support system is, or that support is not there, it really hinders their ability to succeed. They start questioning their why. They start wondering, what am I doing here? There's way too many other barriers that is helping me be more successful focusing in my classwork or all of those other expectations. Cultural and social barriers are also something that students face. Many students are navigating an unfamiliar and so often welcoming. It's 2 different environments. That can be anything from going into spaces where you're needing to make friends. I hear that a lot. It's so hard to make friends. I've had friends for 4 years. And that's such an important part of how they feel a sense of belonging, and they don't know how to navigate what does making friends look like, but also walking into spaces where it's not apparent. What are the commonalities that we share with other people? How do I engage in dialogue? How do I participate in classes, in extracurricular activities? Because they don't really know whether there's options for them, or also they don't know that there are people that they can automatically build relationship with, connect with. Those first impressions are key. So oftentimes we see isolation, especially when they come from backgrounds that are not well represented, or people who understand their lived experiences. And so those are some of the challenges that they talk about, the adjustment to a new environment. That is experienced by all students. Again, those students who are really compiling identities, that becomes a lot harder for them to really feel that sense of belonging. Mental health, isolation, and accessing resources also are that can be stigmatizing too, of thinking, I don't want to be seen asking for a tutor or going into the counseling center. We also hear that students who come from different cultural background might not see talking to somebody they don't know as a practice of sharing their anxiety. And so building some of those things. I talked a little bit about language, not just English as a second language. That is also a challenge, but also just understanding the language of like what you're used to at home, what you're used to in high school, and now what you're seeing in college. How are those communications delivered, and whether students can really understand. They struggle with lectures, reading materials. We talked a lot to students about how they might ask for notes from professors, what are some tools that you can do, but they always often think, well, can I do that? Like oftentimes they don't know what they don't know. So the vocabulary in college setting could be something that's very daunting. The misinterpretation of instructions. One of the things we're noticing is also the challenge with COVID. Like COVID changed, and some of our students were sharing that participation meant I turn in my assignment. It doesn't mean that I show up to class and I participate in discussion board, because that was how they went to school in high school for about a couple of years. And so that was good enough. So really building community back and helping them see the value of being in these spaces where they interact was, also something that we saw. Technology, actually, the digital divide, we know that there's limited access to students being able to, but again, because of finance, they might not be able to buy a personal computer. They might not be able to upload a software that's needed to be able to be successful. Again, participation, but also resource availability, being able to see if they can afford books. Sometimes we saw some students who registered, went to class every day, but weren't submitting the assignments. And later on, it was because they didn't have the books. So what they could do is if they borrowed, sometimes that allowed, but other times they said, I've kind of exhausted my friend, borrowing my book from my friend. And I'm just going to show up and hope that what I can get from the lecture is good enough for me to do something. But sometimes if it's look at the question in that textbook, answer that question, they have really no way of moving forward. Transportation and accessibility, commuting was the big thing that we heard. That was something that was very, that it kept popping up. We have students, for example, who live in Baker, who come use the bus to school. So that prevented them from, if there were course requirements that were outside the class, that would mean that there would be challenges. Sometimes students would choose not to be in classes because of the extra expectations, if they knew that ahead of time. One of the things we also realized was, being able to provide some of those services to students involved being able to partner with outside agencies that actually offered some of those services. So again, this also is a challenge for them. Obviously, with accessibility for students with disability, those are things that we continue to work on, but there are some of those that students were wondering how they can access, what are opportunities for me to maybe take a test online or maybe take test at a different time. So they just didn't know what they don't know. Some of our, obviously we've talked about is our institutional challenges. These were just brief, these are more kind of general. It was actually not really specific, but obviously we know there's always funding and resources and staffing. There's constant changes. And that's something that we continue to address. One of the, I guess, yeah, I'm gonna pause and maybe ask if there's questions.
I don't even know if there's questions, although I will give some suggestions. As I started to read it and listen and hear everything, I was writing down kind of my own personal reflections. I was an Eastern Oregon University student, first time, first child in my family to ever go to college. Born in Mexico, thinking mainly in Spanish until I was in 5th grade. So my whole journey has been one of like these kinds of students. So what it made me think about is I know I needed deep relationships because there's a lot of surface level relationships and that's kind of fine. But if you don't know systems, you need a deep relationship, whether with the adults or whether with students to make you feel connected. I started to feel deep staff relationships. I was an athlete. I had coaches. I had people that cared about me and saw me and grabbed me or did things to me so that I would show up and be there. So those deep relationships with staff. I still remember like the dean of education would take me to coffee or take me to lunch, or my coaches would do those types of things too, besides support me to play a sport. But my point is deep relationships. Maybe we give some funding so staff can take some of their students out for coffee or for lunch, get to know them, mentor them, support them. The close mentorship support for me meant a lot. And it started to happen from my sophomore year all the way through. The events and activities and the learning experiences, the learning, the academic, the classroom, but also the experiences that EOU did. I know you're doing them. So my point is like, that's what we needed, or that's what I know I needed. I'm going to say again, like my first problems were like money problems, housing problems, and transportation problems. I didn't come from a home where I had a car. I got dropped off and I had to walk, and then I got a bike. And then a year later I got a car. But it's these little things of like, I'm figuring it out. And the weather at EOU, my first year was like, I didn't grow up in a mountain town. And I felt isolated. And I felt that weather. And it took me a year, probably a little longer than a year, to love it. Because then I figured out what the things about it that I liked. But those are the things like they need, I know you're doing those things. But ultimately, I'm going to just say again, I felt seen over time. I felt understood, or I felt valued, or I felt connected, and I felt that sense of belonging. But it took me a year to a year and a half to feel that with those deeper relationships. And as long as you're doing a lot of this, to me, this was one of the best things I could ever see, at least from how I see things being done and people knowing that it's the problems and it's the solutions and then the actions and strategies that we take and then the monitoring and then the support. And this is like right up my alley, all the things that you're doing or you're talking about. And it's really keep supporting it, keep monitoring it, keep doing it. But I'm going to say the deep relationships part for me is one of the most important things for people to stick it out.
Thank you so much. I think one of the things that as our team was reflecting on this and with our retention coordinator, is that a lot of people at EOU do what you talk about, that we invest in the students, we, take them to the coffee, we do a lot of those things. And I think the system-wide work that we need to do is who are we missing? Like really identifying that we're already doing some of those with some students, but it's harder for us to kind of see the big picture and kind of see with the ones that we miss, what does that look like for them? And then how do we kind of create efficiencies to allow us to not miss that? So programs like the Smart Shop, mentoring, the student success, those are some of the initiatives that I think are really looking at those systems change, but also recognizing, yeah, I wish I could take the credit for doing that, but that was one of the things we also found is that people who are going above and beyond, but obviously there are, people who kind of fall in between the cracks. And what does that mean for us knowing and reflecting on this work to continue to look at that? And one of the things that I think is really successful last year is there was a retention grant team that pulled information on like who is potentially going to leave EOU for whatever reason. And there were ways to look at starting from finance, like let's just look at finance. Let's look at, who is more likely to graduate and focus on making sure that completion is there. But that is work that continues to get done in smaller departments and also in larger, more strategic or projects like the student success projects.
Yeah, so of course, we want to offer these opportunities to every student depending on their need. And early alert gives an example of what it takes, right? Early alert when is somebody at the beginning of class saying, well, the student might be in trouble. And it should trigger a whole bunch of actions in the end. The first step really is somebody cares. Somebody says this student needs help. And I think that is our call to action. We have all these opportunities, but we all need to be active so everybody can make use of these opportunities in a position to do so and eliminate the barriers that might exist for that. And that's really at the most fundamental level where we can push. We show that care. We take the action to support all students. The President Ryan mentioned yesterday what Trustee Seidel has been proposing for the mentoring program, building actually a Mountaineer success team that is listed in each student's slate record. So, and it starts by looking at the relationships the students have already formed. I mean, George mentioned athletes. There's a close relationship with the coaches, you know. That should not be disrupted by another mentor. That's something that you can build on. There is summer break. They build a relationship with peer mentors. There is the week of welcomes. These are natural relationships that are of value and recognized by students. We build on these, but we just make sure that each student has a group of those. Somebody may not make these connections. So we're trying to assign a mentor for them, who just is a point of contact, and students know they can seek out for help. They know exactly what they can do. And later on, we'll add a career mentor when students go to upper division, right? When the professional development, the professional preparation is getting more important as they get closer to that, to the application state, and an interview. Yes, doing mock interviews and doing all this that we were talking about earlier, right? So there's a part of the success team. So, but again, it needs on build on relationships that are of high value to students, that are recognized by students as having this value enough formed naturally. I mean, we tried the mentoring program, worked for some. For some, you just send an email, hey, I'm your mentor. They didn't know what to make of this. You know, hey, this is your mentor. What do I do with this person, right? It's great they sent me an email. So the communication wasn't established because it felt unnatural. It wasn't a relationship that grew. So we're trying to improve on that to a group of people who cares, right? Who are willing to go that extra mile and say, here, I think this could help you. Sorry, no.
I think also removing silos is part of that goal. Sometimes students will share more challenges they have with a trusted support system. And that allows us to be able to know how we can connect with other members. And the Smart Shop is one of those. It's going to allow us to be able to do that without feeling like, you know, if it's DIB, I'll just talk to you about DIB. You have to move to another person. So this, because the students don't see themselves as these compartmentalized people, right? And so, you know, seeing them as whole people who want most of their challenges addressed, if possible, and prepare them is also a step that is really intentional.
President Ryan mentioned yesterday the equity issue that we have with language preparation. Right? We are requiring foreign language requirement. Students who are lucky enough to get language instruction in high school, you know, they can spend those credits in some other more professional preparation. Is this fair? I think we really need to look at that. And that actually has led Western our university to drop any language requirement as part of their bachelor's degree, reacting to exactly that. So we really need to look at this from the point of view of equity, so everybody can get here and spend the credits they have to take on that preparation that's relevant for them. And for some, it might be adding language. Certainly that can be relevant, yeah, depending on the environment you work. Nonetheless, we want to give students that ability to maximize of what is going to be important for them for their career.
Thank you. So Beanie, and Dr. Keisinger, I really appreciate all the work, your presentation, and all the significant ways that EOU is trying to meet the needs of students who are marginalized and underserved. Of course, you know, I'm always going to bring up our students who fit into those categories who are off campus. And George, thank you for you mentioned one area that jumps to my mind based upon my past experience is financial issues, and you mentioned that as being one of the concerns that you had, and I believe it's a major concern. And also the discussion of relationships, and so how those two intersect for on-campus students and off-campus students. But on-campus or off-campus students obviously don't have the opportunities to build relationships with different entities that on-campus students do. But financial barriers and questions and misunderstandings are a major issue, I believe, for many off-campus students. Many off-campus students are older than average. and, and finances are, often they have other lives. So I guess what my question, maybe challenge, and maybe you have an answer that I just don't know about is there, so calling our financial aid office is wonderful, but sometimes calling the financial aid office isn't really where they can get all the answers to the questions that they may be struggling with regarding finances. Is there a place, is there, have you ever thought about some kind of a resource for students other than their advisor? Their advisor is usually their primary relationship and can be a huge source of support, but advisors don't have financial expertise in those areas. I'm just thinking that might be an area of growth for an opportunity for EOU to figure out ways of helping students have that conversation and making wise decisions about how they might fund their education.
And that's kind of the whole purpose behind that one-stop shop that we're setting up now called the Mountaineer Information Center. It's about meeting every student exactly where they are and actually helping them get to the point where they can formulate the questions that they don't know the answers to or even don't know how to ask. Every individual in that center is supposed to be cross-trained to answer the most common asked questions that arise at the university. And I do think, it's something that's going to build over time. We're piloting it this year, kind of like we talked about yesterday. We're going to have to assess, refine, and grow once we have a better understanding of all the students' need. But we are taking very important first steps in that. And that office serves both online and face-to-face students. It's not segmented by whichever degree, whichever alignment you have in terms of modality. It's open to everybody. And indeed, from the get-go, the build out of the website that's accompanying it has been really critical, knowing that a good chunk of our population is online and does need access to the resources in the same ways as people face-to-face.
And that's another thing we have asked of Tressa Seidel to get this implemented after we talked about a larger team. But yeah, as President Ryan said, people will be cross-trained on these areas. We collected the FAQs that every department has compiled, to really get to the base of what really are the questions that we get and build that base knowledge for that cross-training. There are multiple people represented, particularly in the opening weeks of the term, who have some more detailed expertise, could provide it beyond that cross-training. And for then, they can do the referral for more specialized cases, also more privacy, about financial aids to later on. The goal is to minimize these referrals. There was clearly one thing that came out of a student survey. They don't want to be sent all over campus back and forth. So that's the approach to get most questions answered. But also Tressa is talking to Jeff Carmen about setting up computer stations there. So the Smart Stop folks, and maybe augmented by peer mentors, can actually go online with the students and show them how to do that in the system. So they are enabled more to take care of it in the future. So it's that response system, but also some sort of a training system. And Beanie has offered to put a food pantry satellite location also there to make this space more of a destination, more of a hub, and we're going to make it look nice. So it's really a go-to place. And yes, there will also be online. There will be a Zoom ability. I'm not sure we have it for this fall, but for online students, to connect with one of the Smart Stop counselors, we are that for their questions.
A little bit of a role play, or a little bit of and I'm imagining a little bit of Kathleen Brown, and I'm imagining a bit of Beanie Moses, and maybe a few other people from student affairs. So I'm a student, first semester, first term, failing 2 classes, skipping 2 or 3 other ones, and I'm not sure of how things are navigating. I'm on your list. You're probably going to have somebody reach out to me. Is it going to just be academics, or are you going to give me kind of like, George, what's going on with your life? How are you with food? How are you with housing? How are you with transportation? Do you do some comprehensive checklist? to like understand me. And then when I say I'm quitting because I just, I miss my family, I'm not sure about all the school stuff. It's very hard. My teachers, my professors don't help me. There's no relationship with them. They don't care about me. And are you going to be like, that sucks to be you, George? I know you're not going to do that, but are you going to be like, I'm taking you here, George. We're going to meet with these professors and we're going to figure out something here. I'm taking you here. This is how you can get this. I'm taking you here. This is how it works with financial aid so that you can get housing. Walk me through at least a 90-second. What would you do to me?
Wow. I guess ideally in that situation, you would be um, reported in the early alert, like a professor or somebody who's worked with you has noticed some of the things that you're going through. What we would do is we would then reach out we'd get your name. But one of the things that the retention coordinator would do is just if you are in a particular group, if you're a student of color, if you are an athlete, they would reach out to people just to kind of get a niche of, are you working with this student? That is one component, while they're also reaching out to you to say, this is me, this is what I do. I'd love to get an appointment with you just to talk to you about how I can support you. So those can happen kind of like interchangeably. And while we're kind of researching more information. And then hopefully in most, how we've actually gotten some of this is the student has oftentimes wanted to say, I want to share what I'm going through. And that really helps because then when they do have that Zoom or that one-on-one and share some of those things, we are able to say, are you aware of these? Have you talked to your professor about why you're not coming to classes? Do you feel comfortable having that conversation? Do you need an advocate to talk to you? Do you want me to kind of build that connection? So we offer some of those things that allow the students to be able to maybe feel a sense of safety and know that they have options. If the student has really made the decision, because there are students who are just like, I'm really done. We oftentimes, and again, these are practices that we do that we want to systemize, but those would be some of the ways that we would. But if the student has decided that they don't want to, we oftentimes ask like, so what are your plans? Are you just going to go into work, go home? Do you plan to ever going into another college? What are you thinking about the courses you've taken? Do you know that, if you do take them and move on to another institution, what are some of the things you need to kind of address to make sure you're not, if you're in sophomore year, you've not wasted a whole freshman and started over. How can we continue to build that relationship? One of the things I think what we've done just in DIB, because I can't, is we maintain relationships with the students who choose to live in La Grande or Union County. Because oftentimes we've seen that they don't leave the area because they want to come back. They're just not ready to come back, mainly because of debt. And so they're trying to figure out how do I come back. And sometimes they're just paying for $25 a month. But one of the things, maybe this is intrusive advising. Sometimes our students are in our social media, so we see them going to concerts or, posting pictures in Portland. And so when we see them in Safeway, we're like, by the way, the cost of that concert, that could really have come to make you like pay some bill. So that happens actually. We've oftentimes, I think we see this in some groups where students who are not enrolled are still involved in engagement on campus. They're still coming to the athletic games. So informal conversations occur. But ideally, if we can, for the student who doesn't decide not to come back, work with them and then work with other departments to see what are resources that are available. Is there a chance for a student to get an incomplete? Or what options do the student need to do? It's really hard sometimes when we have to also tell the student that they now have to bear the burden and the consequences of potentially an F. but how do they see that as a learning opportunity to say, I also played a part in this, but also that not saying that their experience that whole time is this, we're dismissing that experience, but also talking about the importance of self-advocacy and sharing. We can only do so much, and think between Week of Welcome, Summer Bridge, all these things, we try to paint that picture for students to say that these are programs that are available, that are our way of letting you know we're here. And so we need you to kind of also meet us where we're at. It's not always perfect, and it's kind of can be individualized, but also thinking about a way to create like an understanding across the work that we do, and how sometimes maybe I may be better positioned to talk about finances with the student instead of financial aid, just because I have maybe the student trusts me more, and I can navigate through how do you talk to your parents about support or what that looks like, but then keep the communication open with financial aid, so they know that what I'm doing is also something that either they can guide me through some of that as well. I don't know if that helps answer your question, but felt like it was a test. Mhm. The recent grant, or, okay,
And since he wasn't mic'd, could you repeat a little bit what he said?
yeah, so there are plans for a resource navigator that even the retention coordinator is also doing some of that. Or we have different, you talking about benefits navigator? Okay, there's so many different titles. So we have currently a benefits navigator on campus, also campus resource advocate. And they also are people that we pull in to help address the non-academic, I guess, support that students have. So if a student is struggling with housing or transportation or some of those things, they're able to help them also navigate those pieces. Even health insurance, how do we get you to get good health insurance so that you can go to a doctor, get that surgery done, and you can get a primary care physician, and they can actually issue and work very closely with getting issue like an OHP card. Same thing, we work with our pantry. We work very closely with our Oregon Food Bank and our local community connection to get food to students. We're actually working on, culturally responsive needs. If a student needs other things outside of what is considered like the basic food, then how do we provide those to help them kind of meet that? And then transportation and emergency housing, knowing that sometimes students have this temporary gap between being able to move into a new place or move into the rest halls, or maybe they don't have a place for breaks or different things. We've also had students who are commuting, and there might be an activity like a play on Friday, and the Baker bus doesn't, leaves, and they don't have a way to come back home, for example. And so we think about like, how do we help provide, transportation needs, or can we give emergency housing until Monday when they can leave because of the schedule. So a lot of these are information that our students provide for us and what their challenges are. And so the benefits navigator is able to think about what those individualized, and then what are some ways that we can create kind of a systemic support system, and also share with others what we can do.
Also, in terms of the curriculum and working in classes, we have a group consisting of our instructional designer, Charlotte Hall, James Dyer from English, Angela Boston-Cool from Education. The workshop is infusing belonging into the curriculum. And I participated in some because I was curious what it means. And it's as simple as in the Canvas shell opening, provide activities, provide good introductions, welcome videos, have students post videos of themselves, for example, things like this that start early on to get the communication going with them. So there's Charlotte is actually going to present a workshop at our mini conference that we have during opening session to spread this more broadly. Also, there is more information on resources that are available beyond what normally goes in a syllabus, which I know often they don't read, but nonetheless, yeah, the syllabus resources are usually linked to what's needed for the academics. And one suggestion in this workshop was to broaden that list of resources available to also address other things. So they're working on a template for that, going to roll it out for faculty to include that and refer to it, you know, when they go through their classes. It's just a small piece of this really, really large puzzle, you know, with so many components.
Deidre had a question, and then Aaron, and then Maurizio.
So I wanted to first speak on the academic preparation that you guys shared, because that's definitely, parts of this was exactly how I felt when I started college. I went to a small, rural high school where I just kind of breezed by and just bebopped. I never learned how to take notes. I never took a final exam, and nobody ever teaches you how to do those things, and you come to college a little bit unprepared. And I was wondering, you know, are those things that we could integrate either into that university studies class that freshmen take? Or my second thought was, after you mentioned videos, is that something that there could be a broad video on what to expect for finals week? Do this to prepare, do this to prepare. Here's some videos about effective note-taking strategies. You just mentioned syllabuses. How do you read one of them? It's like a 16-page, not 16. It's like a multiple page document, and it's a lot of information to consume, which usually, in speaking to language, is high level language written by a professor. And I don't know what half of it means. And this is my 5th year in school. So like, how do you read those things? How do you understand those things? And even things like citations and formats and broadening exposure to that. I had only done MPA or MA, whatever, the one kind of format in high school, and then we had to use APA, and I didn't know the difference. And I mean, even going to my master's program, we've had the conversation with some of our professors about an introduction to grad school course of what does graduate school mean? What does graduate level work look like? What does the formatting look like? Where can you pull sources from? And those kinds of things. Because really, I mean, you jump into it and you don't, I didn't feel prepared for college. I didn't feel prepared for grad school. And it's just been a lot of figuring it out kind of along the way. So maybe some of those things could be integrated into that Canvas shell of like, here's some resources of like videos on how to take notes, what exams look like, what this looks like. And then moving to the conversation we were kind of having about Benefits Navigator, I feel like there's a big difference between having resources available and actually having students use those resources. So what's being done to empower students to self-advocate and to actually ask those questions, or to destigmatize the utilization of some of those social safety net services, and what kind of work is happening there?
So I can talk about Canvas shell. This is indeed being worked on, right? But it has just started, and a big function of this Canvas shell would be to centralize what's already out there. I know the library has some really great resources on how to cite and all these things. People probably don't find it easily, right? So a single shell, like you said, to bring all this in would be enormously helpful. So this is being done. It's kind of a big project. Nonetheless, I do agree this is essential. We push this forward.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. We did start, so the retention coordinator started doing workshops in partnership with DIB. But that, talking about having videos was something that I think is really important, that maybe we didn't do this last year. But we did things like financial aid at the Multicultural Center or in Hope that just kind of addressed the stigma, and it not only helped us and the students be able to just come and ask their questions, it allowed us to work with across departments to kind of see if a student comes from a specific background, like what does that look like? Getting to know, where do your parents work? Have you asked your parents if that company offers scholarships, right? Or just creative ways on having conversations with students around what their financial resources could be from the communities they come from. In addition to what we have to offer, knowing that what we have to offer at EOU may not be like a student getting $10,000 a year, right? As grant, and a lot of it is loans. But for academic success, we started doing some workshops, and that's why I appreciate the video, because we were struggling with participation, or like, we know students need time management, they're not coming, like, and we have so much, you can only offer so many cookies. So, creativity on how we deliver, knowing our students. I think this is one of the purposes of what we're doing is, do we know our students, and how do we get to know our students in a way that allows us to better meet them where they're at? You're absolutely right in the benefits navigator. One of the things that we did, and I think why our food insecurities project, that now is our food pantry, is really successful, is we started talking about community of practice, and like, how do we get students to know that they're not coming to get food because they need it. They're coming to get food to help us grow our program. So we would, sometimes literally be like, have you seen the refrigerator? Help us out, because if you don't get this food, we can't get more shipment, or we can get stuck. And some students, that was actually really working, because they were not just helping us, grow our program, which they really were, but then we were addressing a need that maybe they weren't ready to embrace because of shame or stigma. So we were reflecting on some of these things were really important for us to think about, would I just access because I want to access, and I feel the sense of, ability to do that? Or am I going to be are these students going to come and look around and wonder? So, I mean, we've had to change. We've gotten lots of feedback around this way that you're collecting data might not work for students, to now like using a QR code, which I never thought QR codes were effective in data collection, but it really has been in being able for us to see. And now, I think now our students are slowly starting to see that, and then working in partnership with programs like Swipe for Hunger. And what are those immediate needs that you can just need a meal right there? How do we also promote our, but for the other services, I think that work continues as we reflect on and we learn more about the students' needs and how we better serve them in ways that elevate their experiences.
And I can add some about questions on how to, just general questions to get answers about college. We have changed our advising structure. From now on, each student, undergrad student, will have a professional advisor assigned to them from the time they enter all the way to graduation. Right now, for on-campus student, there was a transition to a faculty member. So to do this. So the goal of that is to have a continuity in a person, who is often the first responder. In a way, they get the first question. So, and they're always there, even throughout the summer, to respond to their question. The goal is then to free up time for faculty away from these mechanical enrollment type issues, getting that out to more mentoring, career mentoring, but also to use them more in recruitment. And that was one of the calls that President Ryan made. Faculty are great at recruiting, being out there directing. So the goal was also to give them the time to do that, what they know best. Yeah, and also let the professional advisors do what they do best, be that point of contact and do the enrollment and all these things.
Can I make one more? I think one other thing I wanted to say about kind of working with students is helping them know that the decisions they're making are smart decisions. So again, food pantry as an example, if you're making a smart decision by accessing a service that allows you to free your money so you can buy your books, or be able to, it's there for you, so utilize it. And even sometimes students who are thinking, well, somebody else might need it more, just letting them know that you're going to get to a point where you graduate and you become a community member and leader, and you're going to give back. So this works in a way that allows us to continue to invest in you so that we can then invest back into the community.
I recognize our time too, so I don't have a question. I just wanted to make kind of a statement. I appreciate this whole presentation, and it's striking me throughout that higher ed does not have a function of financial support when you're targeting a demographic that needs extra help. So I appreciate the intentional focus on this when we do not have a funding stream for this to be our intentional focus. It's a little different than K-12. We get weights and things if we have low SES. There's title support that's different in Title I. And so I just appreciate this focus because I appreciate your story, Deidre, because it's a lot like mine. My entry essay I still have into my undergrad, and it was titled Arriving on Horseback, Not Horsepower. And it's interesting because those of us in our rural schools, and George, you probably fit in this category too, I tell people I ended up in education not because that was probably where my skills or what I was maybe good at, but it was familiar as the only thing I knew. And so it's interesting. And I love that this conversation is there because I'm hearing universality with targeted supports where those come to the top, but the Deidres and the Aarons of the world didn't know how to navigate education either, but we would have arrived at EOU being seen as the ones that should have it all figured out because I have 2 college parents, I have, and so I just appreciate that rural really sets up some challenges at the university that you guys have done a masterful job identifying and providing some really good practices. And I'm excited to see where it goes. And then yesterday, I think Mauricio, maybe you mentioned the power that we could have in some community mentors or some community partnerships. So I'm really curious where either the Ed Foundation or some function of the faces in this room could build up some capacity within Union County community members that have some experience or some passion for supporting our students in adopting a college student of sorts in some way. So thank you for this I'm really encouraged by this work. So I appreciate your presentation today.
Quickly, thank you. I had a long question here that says, when does the student success to EOU means something more than just graduation? And you answered beautifully, Vinny. It seems like there are students that have left campus with whom you still have relationships with. This elevates the idea of DEIB, the belonging, to a function that goes very much deeper than usual in student success definition. So thank you I know it's a big complex stuff of what you're showing, and I know that it takes a big heart, but I think it's beautiful. It goes back to what George said. It seems like when you can move a program into a deep relationship, you started winning. And I think all this shows exactly that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I didn't have a car either, George. I walked from Kingsview every day on the ice and the snow and everything. I remember, this is probably before most of your time, but Dr. Coates was a history professor at EOU. And I remember he had study sessions at his house every time he gave a final or a test. And it was up to the students to be motivated to go to that study session. So I appreciated Deidre saying self-advocacy, because that is a big component of all of this. And you brought it up as well, Beanie. Those students need to realize that resource is there, and then they utilize it. And that has to be some of their own motivation. And I appreciated that. Absolutely fantastic programs. I realized how far we came from when some of us started, and we walked into Quinn Coliseum on the day we registered, and there were tables all around the Coliseum. And if I was in elementary education, I went to that table and that was the extent basically of what was there for us to utilize, you know? So this is great. I mean, it just gives so many resources for our students. Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments, or Chuck has something he's burning to say? No. Oh, okay. He's sitting there trying to remember if Dr. Coates was there when he was there. Oh, anyway, thank you. Once again, your heart and your passion is overflowing. Thank you. Okay, the last agenda item, Chris is going to bring that forward, and he says it won't take very long. We talked about tabling it, but it won't take long. So
I'm hoping we can do this quickly. You've seen the cover sheet and its attachments. What we got, so of course the board engages in these comprehensive evaluations in order to get feedback and outside suggestions on where to move forward. We got somewhat of a shotgun blast of recommendations, but from our consultant in May, but some of them were emphasized more than others, and some of them I think are more consequential or have more potential for payoff to the institution. And so the president and I, and then the president and I and the chair went through that list and came up with these 5 items that are listed on the cover sheet to prioritize. And I'm proposing that take that to the governance committee for work. I will say that when we did a comprehensive evaluation 4 years earlier, we also went it down from a long list to 6 items. And after a year and a half, we'd done 3, maybe 4 of them, and we never even got to the other 2. It's actually a big job doing these things. So I wouldn't want to list longer than this one, but I was hoping that the board would be willing to endorse this as sort of the takeaway from the comprehensive evaluation as work to take on for the coming year and perhaps the year afterwards with governance committee.
Is there discussion on these 4 items? Erin, did you have?
I wasn't going to discuss. I looked through the highlighted, I agreed with it, and I would be willing to put forth the motion to adopt your priority recommendations.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Trustee Aaron Lair made the motion to accept these 4 for further consideration and work from the governance committee. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Was that you, Chuck?
Yeah.
Okay, and Trustee Hoffman seconded the motion. All those in favor, please say
Can I
aye.
just ask a question? Because I'm a little confused. Excuse my confusion. I'm gonna miss something, but I'm looking at 5 priorities. Am I looking at the wrong thing?
No, there are 5 on the list there.
Okay,
Did I say 4?
all right, so
I'm
I
sorry.
seconded the 5 priorities.
Okay, thank you. That was my error. Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Madam Chair, if I might just suggest, I've been involved in a lot of bylaw revisions, and I have no interest in being involved in this bylaw revision. But every time we did that, we had to form a bylaws committee. So I just want to put that out on the table that forming an ad hoc bylaws committee might be something that you want to consider. And I'm not volunteering, but
Yeah. heard your
I know
name.
I'm not volunteering, but I think I just volunteered.
Thank you for the suggestion. We will definitely take it under advisement. Thank you. So that wraps up our retreat. As I visited with people throughout the retreat, I understand that there's parts of the retreat that everybody takes something valuable away from, and parts where they're kind of checking their emails. I would hope that out of every part of our retreat, you found some little nugget that you can tuck away in the back of your mind and either be further thought for you or further conversation or throw it away. I don't know. But I hope out of every little piece of this, you were able to take something positive away. So whether it was your cup of tea or not, hopefully there was some little piece that you valued. I specifically want to thank Susanna and Angie for all of their work in putting this together. Thank you so very much. It is not an easy job, so thank you very much. And Kimberly as well. She's invaluable. We all know that. So, anyway, any other closing thoughts or anything? Please let me know if there's something that you feel we can adjust or make a more valuable experience for our board. Please let me know.
Madam Chair,
Okay.
if I might, I just want to say I'm a fan of the format, the half day followed by the other half day. So I thought that worked well on that.
Great. Yeah, I agree. It's we're a little fresher.
Madam Chair, I really enjoyed being in Baker. It's delightful. Excellent, excellent organization. And I also agree with the format. What I really learned, my takeaway is there's some really cute babies that grew to very wonderful individuals.
Thank you. I needed to hear that. I like it too. Yeah, I thought it was fun as well. Yeah. Anything else? All right. For the good of order, nothing. Meeting adjourned. We'll see you in November.